Hello Year 12, let's start our new content which is looking at communication and homeostasis. It's all part of Unit 5. So today's lesson is going to look at communication and why it's needed. So we're going to look at multicellular organisms, why they need communication systems, look at how these cells communicate with each other by cell signalling, which I know you've looked at in Year 12 content already when you did foundation. So cell signalling is going to come back. That work you did on foundation is really important. We're going to look at the two different cell signalling mechanisms and outline how they work. We're going to look at the terms negative feedback, positive feedback, and homeostasis, and look at the principles of homeostasis in terms of receptors and effectors and things like that. So, first little thing I'd like you to think about, just give yourself a couple of minutes, think about what are the conditions that need to be maintained within the organism in a cell and why do they need to be controlled. So pause the video, give yourself a think, 2 minutes, what can you come up with? Okay, so hopefully you came up with things like temperature, core body temperature, your internal body temperature in mammals and birds especially needs to be maintained, but even other organisms that are not endotherms or don't maintain their body temperature do need to control their temperature. Blood glucose concentration, really important, needed for aerobic respiration. Some cells of your bodies can only respire glucose and can only get glucose straight from the blood, they don't have any stores. Water potential, so osmosis, important. Oxygen and carbon dioxide concentration in terms of respiratory gases, metabolic waste, lactic acid from anaerobic respiration, urea from the breakdown of amino acids, you might remember some of that from GCSE, the iron or electrolyte concentration in your blood which affects water potential, and pH. So if you think about those things, lots of those things, why are many of those things important in terms of being controlled? Well, the key thing is the metabolism that goes on in your body, all the chemical reactions that go on in your body, in your cells, the vast majority of them are controlled by enzymes and they need the right or optimum conditions to function effectively. If you change a lot of these, especially temperature and pH and things like that, you may well change the action of those enzymes or the chemical reactions that are going on inside your cells or how well they function. You obviously, as I mentioned already, require glucose. I've put a capital G there, but you require glucose and oxygen for aerobic respiration. You can respire other substrates as well, as we will see in later topics. And build-up of wastes is toxic. Quite often, build-up of carbon dioxide or lactic acid, they actually affect the pH of your blood to a certain extent, so they're going to affect enzyme reactions, and other chemicals can be toxic, like urea, ammonia, and all those sorts of waste chemicals are toxic to you, so they need to be controlled. So your body needs to be able to detect these things and bring about changes to make sure they don't build up or they don't go too high, too low, all those sorts of ideas. So we're going to think now about the idea of a stimulus and a response. So in these times of lockdown, we've been thinking about, oh, it's a sunny day, how many people are going to break lockdown and go out in the park? Although Boris has now said we can go out and sunbathe if we want, apparently. Anyway, how can organisms control these conditions? What they need to be able to do? So they need to be able to detect a stimulus. So a stimulus is any change in the environment that causes a response. The environment can be internal or external. So it could be external environment, sunny day, warm, okay, or it could be internal, so something's going on inside your body. So any change in the environment that could cause a response, and the response is a change in the behaviour or physiology as a result of a change in the environment. Okay, so run away from the spider. Okay, so physiologies, remember the chemical reactions and things going on inside your body, inside your cells. Behaviour might be running away, going in the shade, lying in the sun, whatever it might be. Okay, so just have a think on the next slide. What might be the external stimuli that are affecting these organisms? How might they respond? Are they short-term or long-term? Why is this fox changed? Have a think for a minute. So maybe the idea is here, the Arctic fox, you can see the environment around here. What's it going to be like in the winter? Well, it's going to be colder. The day length is going to be shorter, so there's less light available. Maybe these stimuli cause it to change its coat. Maybe in the spring, as the day length gets longer and it gets warmer, you can see the snow's melted, the background becomes more sort of browny grey, so changing coat colour and also losing some of the thickness of the coat might be a key response. Better camouflage, less thermal insulation required, okay, and whereas in the winter, thicker insulation layer required and white fur to give you camouflage. What about these water lilies, our little hydrophytes here, okay? What about daytime changes? Maybe these flowers, I don't know if you've ever seen water lilies, but they flower and the flowers come above the surface of the water so they can be pollinated by insects, but their flowers open during the day and they close at night. Okay, so actually first thing in the morning the buds are still tightly rolled up, but during the day they unfurl. So the insects, when the insects are around and more active, they expose the anthers and the stigmas, and the insects come and get the nectar and they get pollinated. And as the sun goes down, the flowers will close up again. So they show this diurnal rhythm, day-night rhythm. Circadian rhythm even. Okay, seasonal changes. When do they flower? When do the leaves die off? Water lilies are not around in this country, at least, all year round. The leaves die off and it dies back and dashes down to the roots in the bottom of the pond in the winter, and then when it gets warm, the leaves grow back up to the surface. So you've got short-term, long-term changes, the external environment. Well, you remember the external environment of an organism or a cell changes. So obviously the external surroundings for us is the environment, but inside your body, the external environment of a cell is your tissue fluid. Okay, so it's just worth remembering. Let's just think of some examples of stimuli, and we're really focusing on humans here, and I may have missed some, it doesn't matter. Okay, so got light, plants also, temperature, sound, pressure, chemicals, taste and smell. Okay, internal and gravity, you can detect which way is up. There's loads of other things you can detect. You can even detect where your arms are, which is a sort of internal stimulus actually. So internal stimuli, your core temperature, glucose concentration of your blood, iron concentration, blood pressure, water potential of your blood, pH, anything that your body can detect internally, really important. Okay, that you have to be able to detect it, otherwise you cannot bring about a response. If you don't know what's going on inside your cells or in your external environment, either surroundings around your entire body or in your tissue fluid or in your blood, then you cannot respond to it. So you need to be able to detect these stimuli. And all of this leads us into the idea of homeostasis. So homeostasis is the maintenance of the internal environment in a constant state despite changes in the external environment. So I just want you to think about, what do we mean by the term constant then? Think about body temperature. What do we mean by the term constant? Maybe sketch out a quick graph. Just pause for a minute. Sketch out a quick graph. Graph of temperature on the y-axis and time on the x. What would that look like? Just pause the video for a minute here. I haven't got a little symbol, but just pause it there. So did you draw it like this? Did you draw it as a straight line? If we mean constant, it means it doesn't change. Core body temperature about 37 degrees C. Does it stay constant? Is it a straight line? Well, it's impossible to achieve in living systems, even in mechanical systems created by humans. There will be changes. So it's impossible to be totally stable. Okay, so what we actually mean is there's what we call dynamic equilibrium. So dynamic is constantly changing, equilibrium is a balance where we get fluctuations over a narrow range around a set point. So if you actually looked at the graph, you would go up and down a bit, but there's a set point from which it doesn't really deviate very much. And actually, we find our body temperature is cooler at certain parts of the day and warmer at others. So at night time when you're asleep, your body temperature falls. I think it's coolest about 4 a.m, something like that, can't quite remember. And then when you're more active during the day, it goes up and down. Obviously, when you're physically more active, it will go up, and if you're sitting down and not doing very much, it will go down. But you've got this set point about which it doesn't really change very much. And actually your set point changes sometimes over a month, especially for women. Okay, to do with the menstrual cycle, your body temperature changes ever so slightly around this set point. This set point moves. We'll talk more about that when we do temperature regulation. But this would be true for glucose control, iron control, water potential, everything. There's a set point that you have, your body will do things to maintain it. So let's maybe make a few notes about those last couple of slides about different examples of stimuli and this idea of homeostasis. This is a really important definition. The constant internal environment despite changes in the external environment. Okay, so how is that brought about? Key thing is then we have this concept of negative feedback. And negative feedback is a process that reverses any change away from normal, so maintaining conditions at an optimum. That shouldn't be there, that. So, it involves change detection by sensory receptors, so detecting that stimulus, some sort of cell signalling, and then some sort of response by effectors. So can you draw out the pathway you would have done at GCSE for this? What is the pathway you remember from GCSE from stimulus to response? Have a think for a minute, maybe sketch it out. Okay, did you get the stimulus? So that's all those different things we talked about. So temperature, pressure, sound, whatever it is. Some sort of receptor cell, something that's able to detect the environment. Some kind of communication system linking up towards the effector. So the communication system here, we'll talk about the different methods of communication in a moment. Okay, so some sort of link up to the effector. The effectors, what are they? Well, they could be cells in your body. If we're thinking about other things, they could be glands or muscles. If you're talking about the nervous system especially, all right, you might have remembered glands and muscles being effectors, but there are other body organs, and when we're talking about hormones, that are also the effectors. They're not necessarily glands or muscles. And then you bring about response, a change. So sometimes we can draw it as a stimulus to response flow chart, or if we're thinking about our negative feedback, we can think of it as a loop. Okay, so we have our optimum condition. If we get a change away from the optimum, so that could be going up or down. This loop works either way. So you could have a loop with the body temperature going up, or a loop with the body temperature going down, or glucose levels going up, or glucose levels going down. The receptor detecting the change, some communication system informing the effector somehow, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. The effector reacting to reverse the change, so we return to optimum. Okay, so if it's gone up away from the optimum, this, body temperature is increased, body temperature will be brought down. If body temperature has fallen, body temperature will be brought up. So this loop, okay, work both ways. Sometimes when we draw these out, we take this loop and open it up so it's a semicircle and have an up and a down loop, if you like, half to the loop. So you might see diagrams where this loop is all on the top for going up, and then there's another loop for what happens if it goes down. So be aware of the pictures you look at in textbooks. You might want to sketch that out into your notes. Okay, so positive feedback then. Well, what's that? We've got negative feedback. So what's positive feedback? So negative feedback was any change away from the normal is brought back to the normal. So if it goes up, it goes down. If it goes down, then it goes up. But positive feedback is actually where any change to the internal environment is detected and effectors act to actually increase the change, make that change bigger. Now you might have heard of positive feedback before. If you've ever heard a microphone squeal or howl, in a concert or something like that, all American TV shows, every time anyone ever goes up to a microphone, it always howls for some reason. It doesn't really happen if you've set up your system properly, but what's happening there is the microphone's picking up sound, it's going through the amplifier, it's coming out the speaker louder, which is then being picked up by the receptor again, the microphone, and being amplified again, so it gets louder and louder and louder and louder, and that's positive feedback. And positive feedback is actually usually quite destructive in living things. It's destructive. If you let that continue to happen with a microphone and a speaker, you'll end up blowing up the speakers and destroying them. Okay, and actually in living things, you don't really want positive feedback, because the whole point about it is keeping things constant. But there are situations where that change being detected needs to bring about a response that reinforces that change, so that condition changes further away from what it was before, which is then detected and it keeps going round and round and round. The way to stop this is you have to break one of these parts. Okay, so examples. There are examples in living things, but they're less common, as I said, because it tends to be destructive and would lead to damage. And the whole point about homeostasis is keeping the organism whole, if you like, and preventing damage. Blood clotting cascade is an example of positive feedback, because the platelets lead to more platelets coming along and making that blood clot until it has clotted. And childbirth. Childbirth is a really good example, because the fetus, or the baby, pushing against the cervix stretches the cervix, which stimulates the brain to produce oxytocin. Oxytocin causes the uterus lining to contract, the myometrium of the uterus to contract, which is the muscle layer, and push the baby harder against the cervix, which stretches the cervix more, which causes more oxytocin to be released, which causes the muscles of the myometrium to contract more, and etc. And it keeps going until the baby has pushed its head through and the whole body's pushed through the cervix, and then that stimulus of the stretching of the cervix is removed and the whole thing stops, so you break it. Okay, because that change, i.e. the stretching of the cervix, is removed. Yeah, so you break it and it stops, so it doesn't keep going forever and ever and ever. Okay, so that's a really good example. It's worth looking at. Both those examples are in your textbook. So maybe spend a bit of time now making some notes on positive feedback, and if you've not made notes on negative feedback, go back, rewind, or look back again at the thing and have a look. Okay, so let's look at the communication pathway then. How is it going to work? We've already looked at the pathway. We've got to go from stimulus to response. We need a receptor, some sort of communication system. So what must a good communication system within the body have in order to be effective? Think about the distances. Think about the fact that we're big organisms. What do we need to have? Have a think for a minute. So maybe you came up with some ideas that it has to cover the whole body. It has to be able to get everywhere. It's got to be able to release a signal that can be detected. So some cells have got to release some sort of signal, and other cells have got to be able to detect it. It's got to bring about the right response. It's got to be specific. It often needs to be quick, but equally, as well as the short term, maybe it needs to bring about long-term changes. If you think about development of an organism, you need long-term changes in how the body is responding in terms of growth and muscle development, all those sorts of things. Okay, so in order to do this, evolution has brought us two systems that are actually more similar than you might think. Okay, but they have evolved separately from each other, or differently from each other. So you've got a neuronal system, so nervous system, where you've got your interconnected neurons. They signal to each other at synapses, so they can transmit information between neurons. It's highly specific in that the nerve impulses, the electrical impulses passing down the neurons, pass directly to a target organ or tissue or cell, whatever it is, but it's highly specific and directed because you've got neurons directly going to, linking up to the targets from the receptor. But they can cross-link to many other places because you've got synapses. It's really, really fast, okay, and therefore tends to bring about rapid response to rapidly changing stimuli, okay, and tends to be much more short-term in its outcomes, okay. And then you have the hormonal system, or the endocrine system, is the proper word. So you have specialized glands called ductless glands, endocrine glands, ductless, no tubes, secrete hormones directly into the blood. And that means the hormones, the chemicals, get everywhere. But, which is not very specific, but only the specific target cells can detect that chemical signal and do something in response. Remember The chemicals are just messengers. They're going to tell the cells to do something in some way, and you'll do lots of detail about that on the other side of the course. Okay, and these tend to be slower in their action and have longer term responses and often permanent changes. So some are short term, some are long term, some change in cycles. You think about the hormones of the menstrual cycle that you did at GCSE, and some of them bring about long term physiological changes, such as all the changes that occur during puberty. Okay, whereas some are much more dynamic in the shorter, daily changes, so glucose control, for example, and some are really, really fast, actually. So adrenaline is a really fast acting hormone. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, you've got a table on this page here. Okay, see if you can fill it in. You've also got this as a Word document that you can print out or type into. Okay, so complete table with as much information as you can. Okay, so hopefully you've got the idea that nervous system is electrical, nerve impulses, the word there, action potentials. Okay, we're going to look at that in much more detail when we do the nervous system. Then you've got your chemical messengers, or your hormones, for their hormonal communication. Method of transmission, so action potential travelling along neurons and crossing synapses between neurons. We've got this networking effect, whereas hormones travel in the blood. The targets are very specific parts of the body, specific cells. Each neuron goes to specific cells or specific tissues or organs, whereas the target for hormonal, because it's in the blood, it gets everywhere, but target cells detect it. Nervous communication, rapid, usually short time period, usually short-lived, whereas hormonal communication, slower acting, slower response, longer acting, often permanent or irreversible changes happen. Now this next bit I wouldn't necessarily expect you to know, but in the nervous system you have neurotransmitters going between the neurons in the synapse, and they're broken down by enzymes, and obviously changes in the receptors will affect the number of nerve impulses or action potentials passing along the neurons as well. Hormones, when they're finished with, they're broken down by enzymes as well in the liver, or maybe even by the target cell itself, because some hormones actually go inside the target cells to do their job, and they'll be broken down there, and the waste products will be excreted by the kidneys. So if we think about what we need receptor cells, or sometimes call them transducers, but we call receptors. Transducers are things that can change one type of energy to another effectively. You've got your neurons, often maybe associated with a coordinator like the brain or the spinal cord. You've got synapses, which are actually just the gaps, the junctions between neurons, and then you've got your effectors like muscles and glands. Whereas with the hormones, slightly simpler maybe, receptor organs, target cells, so receptor organs, so think about glucose control. You've got the pancreas detecting your blood glucose levels. The target cells would be the liver, okay, and the muscles, and the bloodstream carrying that hormone around to your blood vessels and circulatory system. Really, really important there. There you go. Hopefully that's a lot of information for you there. Take a bit of time to go back through the slides, make your notes as you wish. And the next lesson we're going to be looking at will be temperature control, and we're looking at something called ectotherms. Thank you.